Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in sophomore English. We turn now in our study in unit 3 of nonfiction essay writing to page 487, 488 and following. We're going to be looking at Dorothy West's The Sun Parlor. Before we get there though, let's jump to 2B as we often like to do, and let's begin on page 487 with the next kind of essay. If before we were looking at expository essays, now we're going to look at reflective essays. Now, what exactly is a reflective essay? Think of it this way. A reflective essay is like a mirror that reflects back on a certain memory. Just read with me. Notice on 487. A brief nonfiction work in which a writer presents the experiences that shaped or inspired his or her thoughts on a topic. In a reflective essay, notice 3 bullet points. A writer tells an event, time period, an idea from his or her own life experience, introduces and develops reflections on his or her topic, weaving connections between personal experience and a point of general interest, such as a lesson about life, and finally may focus his or her reflections on a specific object, scene, occasion, place, or idea. We want to look for these characteristics in the reflective essays that we're about to read. We're going to look at a couple of them. We also will be paying attention to main ideas, so write that down in 2B. We want to analyze central or main ideas and supporting details, obviously through asking questions as well. And they've even got a chart for you to help you out. Let's talk about it this way as well. You're going to have to write one of these reflective essays, so let's make sure you understand the organization. I would be still at 2B. The organization of a reflective essay always involves at least 2 things. 1, the telling of some event, narrating of some event from something that happened in one's life. Put a note to yourself, the ones that we will write will almost always ask that you involve the use of dialogue. So write that down, the use of dialogue. Number 2, you need to explain in some way or capacity why this event matters in your life, right? Why does this event matter in your life? Of course, again, our big question on 488 at the top of the page is what kind of knowledge changes our lives? And the answer, of course, often is the kinds of knowledge that can only be gained from experiences, which at the time you don't realize is going to be a really important experience. Only after the fact do you realize, wow, that was kind of a really important experience in my life. Let's turn now to 489 and meet Dorothy West, born 1907, dies 1998. West enjoyed a comfortable childhood, one made possible by her family's fiery ambition and hard work. Her father, a former slave, want to write that down, came north and built a successful business in Boston. By the age of 14, West was winning local writing competitions in Boston. A few years later, in 26, she moved to New York City, contributed to the Harlem Renaissance. We'll learn more about this in our junior year, although Langston Hughes we've already introduced you to. An outpouring of African-American creativity in the 1920s. West wrote short stories, novels, essays. She spent the last half of her life in Oak Bluffs, the village in Martha's Vineyard. That is the setting for the Sun Parlor. Oprah Winfrey, by the way, made West's second novel, The Wedding, into a television movie. The background for this story, parlors and sun parlors, in past eras, many houses, like the one described in the Sun Parlor, included a room called the parlor. An early version of the modern living room, the parlor was a place for family members to visit with guests or with each other. A sun parlor or solarium, enclosed mostly by glass, was intended for enjoying the sun and for reading and talking. All right, let's turn now to the story, to the text itself. The Sun Parlor clearly has a moral. We want to write that down right away at level 1. So we're going to be asking, obviously, what the moral of this one is. And in fact, the experience that West relates includes many small lessons in addition to its overarching moral. The Sun Parlor, we're going to discover, and what happens there ultimately will have greater meaning for West than she imagines on the summer day when she finishes painting it. All right, let's turn now. Now, can I say this out loud? Reading a reflective essay is different from reading an expository essay, right? Some students will say, you know, that expository stuff I had to work a little bit harder to get into. Reading a reflective essay is a lot more like reading fiction for me. It's a lot more easy for me to get involved into it. I'm going to guess that you will find this the case with Dorothy West's The Sun Parlor as well. All right, let's really challenge ourselves. Not a very long essay. So now as sophomores, into the 3rd unit, I can challenge you by saying this. Let's see if you can conquer monkey mind and read start to finish all the way through this essay. That is to say, without being somehow distracted or whatever. All right, let's go to work. See how well we do. Not a very long essay, but a powerful essay. You're going to love this essay.
The Sun Parlor. by Dorothy West. This is a tale with a moral. I will try not to tax your attention too long, but I have to go way back to begin because it begins with my childhood. It is about houses and children, and which came first. There were 4 of us children, well-schooled in good manners, well-behaved almost all of the time, and obedient to the commands of grown-ups, the power people who could make or break us. We lived in a beautiful house. The reason I knew that is because all my mother's friends said so, and brought their other friends to see it. On the day appointed for the tour, which included inspection of every room on every floor, my mother would gather us around her and say in her gentlest voice, "I'm sorry, children, but Mrs. So-and-so is coming today and bringing a friend to see our house. You children keep clean and play quietly while they're here. It's not a real visit. They won't stay long. It'll be over before you can say Jack Robinson." Most often a first-time caller, having lavished praise on everything she saw, including us, proceeded out without any further remarks. But there were others who, when they saw 4 children good as gold, did not see beyond their size, and asked my mother in outspoken horror, "How can you bear to let children loose in a lovely house like this?" Every time it happened, we were terrified. What would happen to us if Mother decided her house was too good for us and she hated the sight of us? What would we do? Where would we go? Would we starve? My mother looked at our stricken faces, and her own face softened, and her eyes filled with love. Then she would say to her inquisitor, though she did not say it rudely, "The children don't belong to the house. The house belongs to the children. No room says, 'Do not enter.'" I did not know I could ever forget those sentiments, but once, to my lasting regret, I did. With the passage of years, I took my place with grown-ups, and there was another generation. Among them, the little girl, Sis, who was my mother's treasure. The summer she was 8 was the one time I forgot that a child is not subordinate to a house. We had a cottage in the highlands of Oak Bluffs, of unimpressive size and appearance. My mother loved it for its easy care. It couldn't even stand in the shade of our city house, and there certainly were no special rules for children. No one had ever looked aghast at a child on its premises. Except me, the summer I painted the Sun Parlor. I am not a painter, but I am a perfectionist. I threw my whole soul into the project, and worked with such diligence and painstaking care that when the uncounted hours ended, I felt that I had painted the Sistine Chapel.
492.
School vacation began, and Sis arrived for the long holiday. The car pulling up at the edge of the brick wall, and Sis streaking into the house for a round of hugs, then turning to tear upstairs to take off her travel clothes and put on her play clothes, and suddenly her flying feet breaking to a stop in front of the Sun Parlor, its open door inviting inspection. She, who always was in motion. She who never took time for a second look at anything, or cared whether her bed was smooth or crumpled, or noticed what was on her plate as long as it was something to eat. She, in the awakening that came when she was 8, in her first awareness of something outside herself, stood in the doorway of the Sun Parlor, her face filled with the joy of her discovery, and said in a voice on the edge of tears, "It's the most beautiful room I ever saw in my whole life." I did not hear her. I did not really hear her. I did not recognize the magnitude of that moment. I let it sink to some low level of my subconscious. All I saw was that her foot was poised to cross the threshold of my chapel. I let out a little cry of pain. "Sis," I said, "please don't go in the Sun Parlor. There's nothing in there to interest a child. It's not a place for children to play in. It's a place for grown-ups to sit in. Go and change. Summer is outside waiting for you to come and play wherever you please." In a little while, the sounds of Sis's roaring laughter were mingling with the happy sounds of other vacationing children. They kept any doubt I might have had from surfacing. Sis was surely more herself running free than squirming on a chair in the Sun Parlor. All the same, I monitored that room, looking for smudges and streaks, scanning the floor for signs of scuffing. The room bore no scars, and Sis showed no trace of frustration. The summer flowed. My friends admired the room, though they did it without superlatives. To them, it was a room I had talked about redoing for a long time. Now I had done it. So much for that. The summer waned, and Sis went home for school's reopening, as did the other summer children, taking so much life and laughter with them that the ensuing days recovered slowly. Then my mother's sister, my favorite aunt, arrived from New York for her usual stay at summer's end. She looked 10 years younger than her actual years. She seemed to bounce with energy, as if she had gone through some process of rejuvenation. We asked her for the secret.
493.
There was no way for us to know in the brimful days that followed that there really was a secret she was keeping from us. She had had a heart attack some months before, and she had been ordered to follow a strict set of rules. Plenty of rest during the day, early to bed at night, take her medicine faithfully, carefully watch her diet. She was my mother's younger sister. My mother had been her babysitter. She didn't want my mother to know that she was back to being a baby again, needing to be watched over, having to be put down for a nap, having to be spoon-fed pap. She kept herself busy around the clock, walking, lifting, sitting up late, eating her favorite foods, and forgetting her medicine.
494.
And then one day, standing over the stove involved in the making of a meal that a master chef might envy, she collapsed, and the doctor was called, and the doctor called the ambulance. She was in the hospital 10 days. When she was ready to come home to convalesce, we turned the Sun Parlor into a sick room, for the stairs to the upper story were forbidden to her. At night we who, when she slept upstairs, would talk family talk back and forth from our beds far into the night. Without her we were now quiet, not wanting our voices to wake her if she was asleep. Knowing her recovery depended on rest and quiet. But at night she slept fitfully. The sleeping house and separation from the flock were unbearable. She was afraid of the Sun Parlor, seeing it as an abnormal offshoot from the main part of the house, its 7 long windows giving access to so many imagined terrors. She did not know if we would hear her if she called. She did not know if she would ever get well. She did not get well. She went back to the hospital, and for our sakes was brave in her last days, comforting us more than we comforted her. When it was over, we took the sickbed away and restored the Sun Parlor to its natural look. But it did not look natural. The sadness resisted the sun's cajoling. It had settled in every corner. The 7 long windows' streaming light did not help. I closed the door and locked it. My mother saw the closed door and the key in my hand. She said, as a simple statement of fact, "A little girl wanted to love that room, and you wouldn't let her. We learn so many lessons as we go through life." "I know that now," I said. "I wish I had known it then." Another summer came, and with it Sis. The Sun Parlor door was open again, the room full of light with the sadness trying to hide itself whenever she passed. I did not know how to say to her, "You can go in the Sun Parlor if you want to." I did not know whether she knew it had been a sick room, and might say, "Take your Sun Parlor and you know what," though in less succinct phrasing. I did not know if she yet knew that nothing can be the same once it has been different. Other summers passed, older family members died, and mine became the oldest generation. I was living on the island year-round in the winterized cottage. The Sun Parlor was just another everyday room, its 7 long windows reduced to 3 of standard size, most of the furniture replaced for sturdier sitting.
496.
Sis was married, a mother, coming to visit when she could. Coming, I think, to look for bits and pieces of my mother in me, wanting to see her ways, hear her words through me. It was a year ago that I asked her the question that had been on my mind, it seems, forever. A dozen times I had bitten it off my tongue because I did not know what she might answer. "Sis," I said, "do you remember the summer I painted the Sun Parlor and acted as if I thought more of it than I thought of you? I'm not asking you to forgive me. All I want to know is if sometimes my mother said to you when I went out, 'She's gone.' My mother always referred to me as she when she was annoyed with me. She said she'd be gone a while. You go play in that Sun Parlor if you want to. There's nothing in there you can hurt. Nothing in that room is worth as much as a child." I saw her lips beginning to part, and I felt my heart trembling. "I don't want to know the answer. Please don't tell me the answer. I had to ask the question. It's enough for me that you listened." She smiled.
Now, I've had students that say this is a really fascinating little essay because so much is said without actually being said. Let's first of all, at level 1, just make sure. We just listened all the way through now on this essay, didn't we? No pausing. So let's make sure at level 1, we've written down at least the 3 major parts of this brief reflective essay. 1, the introduction to the parlor itself. 2, the painting of the parlor and the suggestions that there's 2 events that happen in the parlor that are of great importance. The first is, of course, the painting the parlor and telling Sis, stay out, not for kids, go outside and play. And then realizing later that's probably was a mean thing to say. And then, of course, the other important element is the aunt who lives for a while and then finally passes away, convalescing is our word, convalescing in that parlor. And then the third part of the essay, which is long after the fact, when she, of course, as adults, asks Sis about the experience of not letting her go into that room and the ways in which it was possible that maybe Sis had figured out somehow a way to live, around that rule or whatever. She asks, did my mother ever speak about that? And then she says, I don't want to know. The fact that you just heard me out and listened is enough. And that's the end of the essay itself. Now, of course, the key line in this essay goes back onto page 494, right? Look at it with me, second to the last paragraph on 494, right? She knew that nothing can be the same once it has been different. It's an interesting line, right? I've had students that actually write that down as the main message at 2A. Nothing can be the same once it is different. There is no going back. Another major message at 2A. There are words that once spoken cannot be unspoken. We just have to learn to live with those words. Our actions, a third major message at 2A. Our actions have consequences and ripple effects that, are you ready for this? We often don't understand until we're much, much older. Much older. Of course, jump to 2B, reflective essay, reflecting back on an event, but having some important meaning, right? What is the chief meaning in the Sun Parlor? Well, Dorothy West says it has a lot to do with a memory from way back. And I only realize now that way more important than a room is the child. Way more important than stuff is people. Way more important than our possessions are the people in our life. At 3A, what is the text for you that teaches you that? What is the text for you that reminds you that the most important thing in your life are the people in your life, not the stuff, not the money, not the possessions, but the people? And finally, at 3B, let's ask this question. What's a time in your life when you remembered that? When you understood that? A time in your life, for example, that you made a choice that was not driven by your interest in stuff, things, possessions, but rather your love of the people in your life. And we have to ask it, don't we? This essay requires that we ask it. What was a time in your life when you forgot that? When you got so caught up in the stuff? A student once reading this essay said, totally happened to me the other day. My little sister messing around with my brand new purchased cell phone that I'd worked so hard to buy, and she drops it in the water, completely ruins it, and I was so mad and I unleashed on her. And now I read this essay and I say, in 30 years, when we're both adults, will I really care about that stupid cell phone? No. Will I care about the relationship that I either have or I don't have with my little sister? You will. For every young person who's ever said, it doesn't matter the way I treat people. The only reason you say that is you haven't lived 30 years. When you live 30 years, you will recognize people are way more important than possessions. Way more important. Well, Dorothy West, of course, setting us up for a project to understand a concept like that so beautifully well. Well, notice, it's a very short essay, beautifully written in so many ways. Thank you.